Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Andy Schimborn, and before I get started, I just want to do a quick thank you to the Egg Collab Gathering for inviting me here to share some ideas about poetry and writing with you. I'm a high school teacher. I teach at Clare Pioneer High School in Clare, Michigan, and we have poetry every single day. I've learned it a long time ago from some other mentors that poetry helps to not only help us to understand the world a little bit better, helps us lean into the world a little bit better, and it also helps us to pay attention to the words that we have already within us. And that is why I'd like to share our ideas today with this idea that there is a poet that already rests in wait within all of us. And this session today is going to help to free the writer within. If you notice, there's a QR code there. If you'd like to use the QR scanner on your phone, you will have access to the presentation, and there are links to all the pictures right in there. There's also a Cutly URL down there that will also, if you type that in, it'll take you right to where you need to be for the presentation. Of course, my handle is down there on the bottom as well. And if you'd like to send some ideas out on Twitter and share some of the ideas here with folks there, you can go to hashtag the Ed Collab Gathering, where everyone will be sharing ideas on Twitter there. Just like in class, we're going to just kind of launch into this. And the way that I'm going to try to launch into this with you is with a spoken word poet. Spoken word poetry is something that is fairly useful, not only for me as a teacher, but it is also useful for students to hear what it can sound like to bring your voice out into the open and to share with people. And it creates an environment in which we can learn through words together as we get comfortable with vulnerability. I start this at the beginning of every year. This might be a piece that looks familiar to you. This is by Jason Reynolds. We're only going to be playing part one of it, but this is for the dreamers, because I believe our students, just like you and your students, are dreamers. And Jason Reynolds does a wonderful job of tapping into the idea of the dreamers. After we listen to the poem, we are going to be doing a bit of writing. So I'm going to ask you at that point to pause where you happen to be at, give yourself about 5 minutes to write, and I'll share some writing with you too. This is the first post that I have my students do in their blogs to begin the year. It helps them to do a couple of things. Helps them to connect with themselves, helps them to connect with the learning, helps them to connect with their writing, and it also allows them to consider what goals they may have for themselves. But a little bit more on that as we go through this, but you'll want to have a notebook with you, you'll want to have a pen with you, and you'll be ready to have a little bit of listening to poetry, and we'll have some writing as well. Enjoy.
Scene one, take one. Mark.
Dear Dreamer, this letter is being written from a place of raw honesty and love, but not at all a place of expertise on how to make your dream come true, because I don't know nothing about that. I haven't been through it all and come out on the other side pinned with a blue ribbon or draped in a victor's sash or dollar bills or even unshakable happiness. In fact, I have yet to see my own dream made tangible. This letter is being written from the inside, from the front line and the fault line, from the uncertain thick of it all, from a man with a straight line mouth and an ego with a slow leak, from a man doing it the only way he knows how, splitting his cries and his smiles right down the middle, swallowing his moonshine mistakes. While in the sunlight, his sweat irrigates his life, and that life he, like you, has been tilling, hoping there's a harvest coming. At 16, I thought I would have made it by now. At 18, I said 25 was when I'd make my first million, and at 25, I moved back in with my mother. Bill collectors breathing on me like Brooklyn summer. And at almost 28, I'm just almost 28, so I got no answers. The truth is, our dreams could be as far away as forever, or as close as lunchtime. Tomorrow, you could wake up and read this letter on a billboard, or you might wake up and forgot who wrote it. It all just depends. Some say on skill, some say on will, some say on luck, some say on buck, some say on race, some say on face, some say on Sunday, God got a mighty, mighty plan. Nobody know what it really depends on, but everyone knows it depends. So I went out and I bought all the books on how to make dreams come true. Laying out the how-tos, somehow spinning life into some fantastic formula for dummies and dream chasers written by experts and dream catchers who swear that they can 1 + 1 and left foot, right foot my way into fulfillment without ever taking into consideration all this mess I got strapped to my back and my head and my legs and my heart. Them books didn't bandage my fat and flat feet, swollen from this journey. The pages didn't spin, nor could they be eaten to ease the hunger. Though I could curl up with one, I couldn't curl up on one for a decent respite from the hunt. Useless. I thought about burning them. I mean, at least I could use the firelight for this long and often dark road. One thing I'm now certain of is that this road less traveled is traveled by more suckers than you think. All of us out here slumped over, wearing these weird, fake, broken smiles, trying to avoid the truth that we all got road rage. We are a bunch of exhausted stragglers, exalted strugglers, disciples of the dreamers that came before us, students of a different Bible, reading the book of the City of Angels and the Big Apple and an orange house in old New Orleans, or a cheap barren flat above a bistro in Paris. We are led by the Moses in our minds to the promised land in our hearts that we know is real. At 16, I thought I would have made it by now. Now I'm making up what making it means as I go. But this letter ain't about making it, because I don't know nothing about that. I don't know nothing about that at all.
Welcome back, readers and viewers and listeners, to the poetry from Jason Reynolds. We are going to do a little writing into the day here, and this is a writing I have my students do too. I think Reynolds does a great job of setting the tone and the mood and the atmosphere. That we realize school can be lots of different things, but if we are only paying attention to the goals that other people give us, we're not really paying attention to the goals that we might have for ourselves. And oftentimes my students will say that they don't write, although they do. They just equate writing with school type writing, essays and whatnot. But really the writing comes from different places. And so what I'm going to ask you to do here, and this is the same prompt that I share with students after the Reynolds poem, and ask you to pause the video. I'm going to leave this script so you can see the screen here, and just do a little bit of writing. So if you wanted to do a little writing for yourself, about 5 minutes or so, you can pause the video and then you can unpause. And I'll come right back with my response to this letter to the heart. Just start with, Dear Dreamer, the truth is, and then write your truth when it comes to writing. And then finish by saying, and that is why I write. And then at the end, I like to do this. I encourage my students to do this too, so we can give ourselves grace, because we need grace as writers as well. Please write with love, me, or you can put your name or however you want to do that. So take just a moment and pause where you're at, please. 5 minutes. Okay, welcome back. In that 5 minutes, I was able to get a little writing done myself. And this is what I've written. I'm sharing with you what I've written, not so much because I think what I've written is really, really good. Really, I'm sharing because I'm wanting to be vulnerable with you. I want to be vulnerable with my students. I want to write with my students. I want them to see that I can do the writing just right along with them. So that way we are in an active process of learning and growing and writing together. I have to learn as a teacher to free my own writer within, and students will be able to kind of follow suit with that. But this is what I wrote. Dear dreamer, the truth is, I don't believe that I'm a capable writer. There is a judge that rests in my mind, and he has made himself too comfortable. He sneers at my words and laughs at my thoughts. He tells me no one is ever going to read that. He is my enemy, and yet I know I know I can put him on mute. I can ignore him. I can fade him into the background by choosing to be vulnerable with my words. Yes, he is still there. I suppose he'll always be there, chomping on his cheap cigar and blowing smoke into my eyes. But my words are valuable. They have saved me. They move others into action. My words have power beyond measure. And that is why I write. With love, Andy. So thank you for indulging me there, but it's more than indulgement. It's also about trying to share and show how we can interact with our students and open up communications with them too. You know, a friend of mine, Travis Crowder, asked this question in a session a few weeks back. And I think it's a great question for us to stop and think about. Where does writing come from? You know, and when he had us think about that, we took some time, we talked it out, we did a little writing, but I'm just going to ask you to think about that question. You don't have to do any writing for it right now. You just pause and consider it. But I think that there are lots of different reasons. But one reason, one place where writing comes from is brought up by Felicia Rose Chavez, and it's from the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop. She writes that writing is a relationship with the self, after all. It's a ritual of tuning in and listening to the language inside each of us. And I think that's why it's important to be vulnerable as a teacher when it comes to writing. I think it's important to be willing to share poetry, even if it's not, quote unquote, the best poems that are out there, because we are just learning, growing, and looking for different sparks sort of along the way. And I think oftentimes as writers and writing teachers, we'll often talk about audience and who the audience is and what audience is that. And a lot of times in school that becomes like an imaginary audience, an audience that, you know, just imagine if it's this person or that group, how might you change your approach in your writing? And that is fine. But one audience that I think that we forget about quite often as teachers, or even as writers, is the audience of self. Am I writing for myself first? Because I think when we ask students to write for themselves first, that changes the game of school. It changes it from just writing just for a grade and writing to complete a task or writing to complete an assignment. It turns that writing into something that is more introspective. It turns the writing into writing for yourself in a way that schools don't usually ask you to do. Usually you're writing for somebody else, and it's not as fulfilling as writing from the heart for yourself. Just to give a perspective on this, students shared a piece that I thought was pretty powerful. Isabel has given me, and her parents have given me permission to share this with you. But what I liked most about it is, as a 10th grader, Isabel was pretty in tune to why she writes. And she writes, "It's in the absence of words I write. When I'm too hesitant to share my story aloud, I write. When I can't even bring myself to speak, for nothing I say could capture how I'm truly feeling, I write. I write for myself, to try to make sense of what I'm feeling on the inside, to bring thoughts to life on a piece of paper, and to finally see it come together like it was meant to be. Freeing myself from the concealment, finishing that sentence and letting go, feeling of release when you have given of yourself what was needed. And even if you didn't, you are content with that. Because there will always be a void to fill and a reason to write again. So we can get some snaps for those words, should you choose to. That's a habit and some small celebration that we have in our classroom. But I think that Isabel really does a great job of hitting why really a lot of us write, not just why she writes, but why a lot of us write. So it begs the question. So there's lots of different genres. There's lots of modes of writing. We can write on paper with pen. We can write digitally. We can create digital stories. We can create podcasts. We can create lots of different things. So it almost begs the question, so why poems? I mean, why? And the big reason for me, beyond vulnerability and beyond looking for empathy and creating a environment in the classroom, is that poems are multimodal texts. And these ideas come from the work of Cheryl Ball, Jennifer Shepard, and Kristen Arola from Writer Designer. There's 5 different modes of writing that show up within poetry. There's the linguistic mode that often refers to the written or the spoken words. So these are pretty easily seen when it comes to poetry, especially if we're reading poetry out loud, listening to spoken words, sharing our words with each other, writing with students. The linguistic mode pops up quite a bit. There's also the visual mode. These are the images and the characters that people see. So when I think about this as far as poetry goes, we think about the words that are written on the page. If the words are all chosen with purpose and with intent, so is the placement of those words, the rhetorical decisions that you're making when you view a poem visually and see how that adds to, enhances, or maybe even causes a reader to view a poem differently. There's also the oral mode, and this is focused on sort of sound. I mean, yes, we can think about sound in a poem in the spoken word sense. That's pretty easy because we can hear it, right? Sometimes, like the Reynolds poem, we can hear it, and there's music that goes beyond it too, or behind it as well, that helps us to enhance the ideas that are coming within the words themselves. But I would argue that even within the words themselves, if we are not reading them out loud, there is an oral mode that's happening, because with the alliteration, with the repetition, with the sounds that are happening within the language themselves, the oral mode is also working within poems. There's a spatial mode. This is that physical arrangement and the proximity to the text. In some forms of poems, there's play that happens with the text itself. Sometimes words are made larger, sometimes words are made smaller, sometimes words can sort of fall off down the page. Depending on how a poem is physically arranged, is also adding to this idea of a multimodal text. And then the gestural mode typically happens when we have listened to poems that are read either live or in a spoken word format. And this is the movement and the actions of the speaker, the facial expressions that kind of go along with poems as well. So as far as like meeting standards and benchmarks and Common Core, speaking and listening, standards are certainly met. We also have the standards for writing are certainly met too. And poems are just short, encapsulated ways for us to kind of always immerse ourselves in the language, in literature, in writing that we're doing for each other. And they're short enough, they're impactful enough, there can be emotional responses that bring people together as a class. So to give you just an example, we're going to take a look at Elementary by G Yamazawa. And the reason why I'd like us to take a look at this is I want you to pay attention to all those different kinds of multimodal text features that are happening here. We talked about 5. So just as you're watching, just think to yourself, what are you noticing and what is worthy of note as you're paying attention to the multimodality of G Yamazawa's elementary?
I was so young, I don't even remember how old I was the first time I called someone gay. But it had to have been elementary school. See, one day, my dad was picking me up, and right before we pulled out of the parking lot, a girl waved at us with a smile like a vine. Even though she was the orchard that everyone picked on, she was still sweet and loved to be alive. When my dad asked me why I didn't wave back, I told him it was because she was gay. He looked at me with one of those religious stares, and every bit of Buddhism in his brow raised the question, what does that even mean? We all crack under peer pressure. But once you see that their earthquakes are coming from your faults, you realize how deep trembles are felt. Beneath the surface, where things are left and forgotten. See, this was before poetry became my world. I noticed that words have gravity. I've seen them crush people. From a first-person perspective, I felt a phrase fall out of my mouth like an atom bomb without knowing the effects will radiate for years. I've loved a language that hates people, cracking jokes trying to shatter their mirrors just because I wasn't confident in my own reflection. I hated myself for the shape of my eyes, so I became a bully because we all want to feel like America sometimes, and we all want straight spines. And we all want straight spines to stand for something we believe in, but it's funny how flags and people have the same knack for politely waving at the ones they have forgotten. See, as early as elementary school, my parents planted a seed, and the lotus of Buddhism began to blossom in my brain. We had a pond in the backyard, and the flat water taught me of equality, that life is the one thing we all share. I was also taught how to pray. I've been memorizing mantras and chanting sutras out loud before the Pledge of Allegiance ever molested my lips. I was taught of cause and effect, how it is the ultimate truth that everything relies on, how a thought will turn to word as quickly as fuel becomes fire, whether it's for burning down a house or for keeping a lover warm. The spark of an idea will always match the fuming language we decide to pour out of our mouths, but I forgot that the voice does the work of the Buddha, so why would I ever call someone gay before calling them beautiful? Why would I not praise the person that drinks the same water as me? Why would I lift my voice just to put someone else down? You see, us humans, we have a habit of overpowering and taking what doesn't belong to us, but I pray that we are making our way towards the moment when our tongues are the only thing left for us to conquer. And if there's one thing that I've learned about being a poet, it's that it's not about what you have to say in your poem, it's about what you have to say when your poem is done.
Snaps for G Yamazawa. Yeah, so obviously we can hear, we have the spatial mode, we have the oral mode, we can see the gestural mode. The only mode that we may not be able to see is the mode where we can see the structure of it on the page itself. But poetry does lots of things for us. It helps us give voice for people who may not necessarily have heard voices like G Yamazawa's before, topics for people who may not have heard topics like this experience of his or the speakers in elementary school. And it gives us a space to kind of be open and to think about our relation to the people that we have in the world. You know, a lot of times people say, either when it comes to writing, either you have it or you don't. And I really like what Elizabeth Gilbert says, because she kind of pushes back on that. You know, it's not big magic. She asks, you know, the central question on which all creative living hinges is, do you have the courage to bring forth the treasures that are hidden within you? Do you have the courage to bring forth the treasures that are hidden within you? I'm pausing there because that is challenging. It's challenging first and foremost because we have to be willing to tell our truths. As teachers, as students, as writers, and we also have to understand too that our truths can change, and they should change over time. Perhaps there are some truths that will never change, but for the most part, as we learn and grow and change ourselves, so too can our truths. But can we capture those moments for ourselves? This is one thing that I have my students do. We're not going to write to this particular one, but I wanted to share this with you because a lot of times when writing happens in a classroom, students are given a certain prompt, and prompts may or may not resonate. This particular prompt, Reflections of Hope in My Mother's Eyes, is a prompt that works really well. This is not my mother. This is my grandmother, and she would probably not be too thrilled that I'm sharing this picture with you. She is someone who really shied away from the camera quite a bit, but I was fortunate enough to be able to snap this picture quite some time ago, and it's one that I cherish for myself. But I use this picture too because when you think about reflections of hope in someone's eyes, it's not just looking into someone's eyes, but look at the reflection of yourself in that person's eyes. Now, when I ask students to do this, it could be grandmothers, it could be mothers, it could be fathers, it could be dogs, it could be significant others. Maybe it's your own eyes looking into a mirror. But students tend to gravitate towards this fairly well. And I won't read the whole thing. I wrote, my grandmother's eyes are rolling pastures, where roots grip tradition, where neighbors weary of work come to rest. The good earth is keeper of whispered words. My grandmother's eyes are rolling pastures of coarse corn, strengthening the grip of a calloused hand. I approach them, and on the threshold of her eyes is a boy looking for himself in the clear blue skies and soft sands of insecurity. In my grandmother's eyes, I also encounter myself, because into them I move to find the steady rhythm of peace and love in rolling pastures endured with humility for me. In many ways, this is similar to the Where I'm From poem, but what's different to this is it doesn't focus just on place. It focuses on reflecting on the reflections of yourself in the eyes of another. And students are able to connect to that inner writer with themselves fairly well with this prompt. Because writing poems is a way to uncover what most needs to be uncovered. And prompts help us do that, to loosen the tongue in solitude, to make connections that can't be made in conversation. Poems are made of questions more than they are made of answers. And Patrice Vachon shares this idea in her work, My Shouting Shutter, Whispering Voice. And I use it quite a bit with my students to help them uncover those words and to dust off those words and maybe look within themselves for perhaps the first time in a long time. These are my students. This is my classroom. The upper left-hand corner, I have a student, Sierra, who asked to read after a portion of time. She would like to read out loud in class, so we listened to her as she shared with us. And in the bottom right-hand corner, students getting ready for homecoming this past fall. So you can see, I think it's helpful to get a sense of the students that I have. And again, a little bit of their perspective too. This was the perspective on the first day of school. A student had said to me, I hate reading, I hate writing, and if you try to make me do either, I'll probably hate you too. That was hard for me to swallow, but I also realized too that it wasn't actually true. Maybe it was true in that moment for that student who was living in a system of education that just didn't really work for her. But in this case, I saw her reading quite a bit, consuming media. I saw her writing on Snapchat, texting. So she did do these things, but I think it was school writing and reading. And just to see, so you can see a little bit of the journey, I have students work on reflections throughout the course of a semester. And in one case, I have students who read about 4 books, and writing, I put the most effort into writing and becoming better at it. I've always struggled to write and trying to make sense when writing. I've seen that I've gotten a lot better with it, and I don't struggle as bad. I always felt embarrassed turning in a writing assignment when I knew it didn't make sense, that everyone else has actually made sense. I guess that's always been one of my biggest problems, because I never thought I was going to be able to write as good as I do right now in life. I teach alternative education students this year, and many students have been told that they aren't able to or haven't been able to, and we are graded in such a way that makes them feel as though they're not able to read and write very well. And yet we can create these moments for students to be able to find themselves as readers and find themselves as writers, perhaps for the first time in a long time. Just like with writing isn't magic, the whole writing in my classroom isn't magic. This is a structure that I follow quite regularly. Monday, Wednesday and Friday, we have independent reading. On Tuesday and Thursdays, we have independent writing. Every single day has a poem. Mondays, we begin with spoken word poetry. So we'll hear from other people like we have heard from Jason Reynolds and G Yamazawa today. On Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I'm usually reading from some type of an anthology. Right now, we happen to be reading from Maggie Smith's Keep Moving. Short, sweet, kind of Instagram-ish poems, but we can read a few of them and they help kind of moving us forward as well, keeping us moving. I've also just started reading too from devotions. So that's a great piece as well. So thinking about the poems that you use don't matter so much, I don't think. We can make strong connections with what we're doing, but I think what we're doing is we're not breaking down the poem in my class. We're just having a poem for the day. And many times the poems work themselves into the room and the atmosphere in ways that are unexpected anyway. And then if you look at Friday, we have what I call Featured Poet Friday. So over the course of a marking period, students have a lot of writing they put together. They're asked to have one piece of writing to submit to their blog posts and to write a little bit about that. Some of those are poems, some of them are not poems. And usually the writing is really, really good. So what I'll do is I'll ask for permission and have students share some of their writing on Friday. So we move from hearing spoken word from a guest speaker from YouTube to having daily poems read by me or by students, and then moving to featuring a poet on Friday as well. You can see I have 72-minute class periods, at least I did when I was teaching at Mount Pleasant. I'm teaching at Clare now, so we have 40-minute class periods. So that became a little bit of a struggle. So we were taking 15 minutes a day. Now I've moved it down to about 5 minutes a day, maybe 8 minutes in my 40-minute classes. I was worried that that wouldn't be enough time, but strange enough, it is enough time. If we can find a way to make those spaces and create those environments in the classroom, even 5 minutes to read and to write is enough time for us to get into our reading, get into our writing, and create a habit that habit for ourselves that creates identities of reading and writing for us as well. So one of the poems that student wrote that came out of Featured Poet Friday was by Hope. And Hope has given me permission to share this with you. She writes, "What do I think about life? Are we even here? Is this a dream? Why do I have so many questions? The thing is, I can't tell you how I really feel. And if I do, how do I know you won't think I'm crazy? You see, none of us are truly going to write about how we feel about life, let alone talk about it. But one thing I do know is the tiniest things matter. What if some little kid was crying because they lost their balloon and seeing that made him laugh? You see, life is crazy. When bad things happen, we question it. Why me? Why this? Why now? We don't know where we go when we leave this place, but we all have theories. Life is just a magical abyss of hurt, pain, healing, and happiness all crammed into one bottle together, mixing up like sand. We get so lost trying to count all the pieces, and the wind blows it all away before we can notice how much flew. And then we start over again, but in a new bottle." My alternative education students have been kind of shoved under the rug for a long time. And I think that Hope captures part of the reasons of why that might be. Life is a struggle for her, struggle for a lot of us. It can feel as though you have grand plans and then everything sort of just blows away. But one thing I really appreciated about Hope's piece was the way that she said we can start again in a new bottle. It's easy for students to kind of get stuck on the negative. In this case, when I was conferencing with Hope, I had asked her to think about, how might she end on a positive note, not to try to gain control of her writing, but to have her think about how we can keep moving forward. And I like that idea of starting again, but in a new bottle. So I talked a little bit about blog posts that I have in class. And so these are regular writing routines. This is for trimesters. So when I switched to semesters, I had 18 weeks. So you can see week 1 where we do a blog post for writing goals, reading or writing goals. We use the Dear Dreamer piece from Jason Reynolds. And then at midterm, which in a trimester would be week 6, midterm for me in a semester is week 9. Students are to create a publishable choice creative writing piece, independent reading analysis, and then growth territories as a way to reflect on projects that we are using in class. All of these ideas are connected to the habits of mind, the framework for success in post-secondary writing. They work not only to help us as learners, but to help us as readers and to help us as writers and to help us just play with the language in ways that can be surprising for students and really sometimes surprising for teachers as well. So when students create their publishable choice of creative writing, they go through a process. So we take like that whole week 6 and it becomes an open writing workshop. It's in these open writing workshops that I think the fire to burn and creation of the identities that students have really seems to open it up. We try to cram so much into everything that we do, and perhaps we're asked to, teach bell to bell, make sure we have all the standards and benchmarks. So we're checking all the check boxes off for every single Common Core state standard. Are we meeting the needs for our evaluations? Are we meeting the needs for students individually, as a group, in partnerships? And when we cram so many things in, it can make it really difficult for us to see and pay attention to what it is that we're doing. So by having that space of an open writing workshop where students have blog posts to work on, ways to confer with me, ways to confer with each other, it does what Judy Soren Brown talks about in her work, Fire. She writes, what makes a fire burn is a space between the logs. It's a breathing space. Too much of a good thing, too many logs packed in too tight can douse the flames almost as surely as a pail of water would. So building fires requires attention to the spaces in between as much as to the wood. When we're able to build open spaces in the same way we have learned to pile on the logs, then we can come to see how it is the fuel and absence of fuel together that make fire possible. We only need to lay a log lightly from time to time. A fire grows simply because the space is there, with openings in which the flame that knows just how it wants to burn can find its way. And that open space is important because it turns into a reflective space. It incorporates that freedom of creative writing. We're not just writing on demand all the time. It allows students to have writing look like talk, have writing feel like play, have writing evolve and change, and they can express themselves. In other words, we're just writing for the sake of writing without too many things tied to it, with the exception that students are choosing just one piece that they want to lift up for themselves and one piece to work on. So indeed, writers need time and space. During that time too, we revise, we polish, and we get ready to do some publishing as well. You can see, if you're wondering about what that blog post might look like, there are requirements down here. I'm not grading their words specifically. I'm wondering, do they have a high definition summative image? Does their piece seem to be revised and edited? Do they have words from the author where they kind of tell the story, where the idea came from? Can they share a revision decision? What is a specific revision that they made that added power to the piece? How can they do that in a way so they can be reflective of and share the practices that they're doing when they're revising, polishing, and publishing? These become part of the sharing that we do. I share my work to begin with in the first 9 weeks, the first 6 weeks if you're in a trimester. Every Friday, I'm the featured poet, not so much because I want to brag and show off, but more so because I want students to get familiar with the format. And Exit 131 is a piece that I write and share. And I share it mainly because there's a picture of me getting ready for prom when I was a senior, so students can see that. And then we move on to other students' work. Everything But Us is a work by a student of mine that is shared as well too, so students can get familiar with having our words in the classroom on Featured Poet Friday. We also move into becoming comfortable with vulnerability, and we create Google Spaces and Google Sites where we have our work there. I do want students to share their headshots, and I have parental permission for this as well, because I want them to go through the process of what it is to be a writer and the whole process, not necessarily just doing something for school, but doing something to kind of put yourself out there. We take our words and we branch out. We have in the last year and a half, not even that, I would say last year, created 3 different anthologies of writing. Last year started out of the pandemic, the first year, first and last. We also worked on creative writing class, Silver Linings, Writing Through Our Eyes, and Scaling Mountains is what we did most recently. Each of these, you can click on the links and then you can find the poems themselves and you can use it. You can make a copy for yourself if you choose to, and use them as mentor texts for yourself. But it's not just creating a book that we share with students, we share these books out with people in the district and people around too, so that students can get some well-deserved recognition for the work that they do. Behind the scenes, we collaboratively build this together. So I do have conversations with students, and we did make decisions on what is the overall arc of the book, what's the title going to be, what images should we choose, which pieces are going to make it into the book, which pieces are not going to make it into the book, and the reasons why for that. I think it's important to know that there are some pieces that don't make it in, and it's not about no extra credit or any bonus. It's just authentic writing as much as we can do it in a publishing sense. When it comes to poets, these are poets that tend to resonate with students quite a bit, and you can learn more about them by clicking on the links of their names. Micah Bornier is someone who makes his words appear in our classroom quite often. I read them. Tanai Winder, G Yamazawa we heard from, Jose Olivares, and so on and so forth. And same with Sophia Thakor. But sometimes poetry, if students say they don't like poetry, novels in verse really work well for reluctant readers because they feel like they're reading a larger book, but even though the ideas pack a punch, they're short enough where they can feel accomplished within their reading. So it's helping them with their reading. They're getting familiar with poems in different ways and seeing that poems can have structures, but oftentimes just don't have structures. Seeing mentor texts in these ways are also ways that will help students free that writer within for themselves as well. I also think sharing invitations to write poetry through Rattle. There's monthly ekphrastic poem challenges where you can win like real money, like real money. If we're going to be writers ourselves as teachers, I think we should be teacher writers. We should be the practice of doing that. And Sarah Donovan's Ethical ELA, which is going to be starting up here shortly in April, is a great place to start. We have actual teacher writers from around the nation getting together to share their words and to comment on each other's words through Verse Love. And if you're looking for daily poems for the classroom, not just for National Poetry Month, but also throughout the year for different prompts you may have for students, Brett Vogelsinger's Go Poems is a great collection of not only teacher poets, but also poets general. And they go through processes of how to write poetry in a way that is short and sweet, but also maintains the ideas that go into making poetry work. I think before I finish up here, Poetic Justice, often people think about that as the movie, I think it was from the 90s, which was a wonderful movie, but also Poetic Justice is out of Oklahoma. There is a prison for incarcerated women that uses writing and uses poetry to help them free their own selves. And if you'd like to donate to Poetic Justice, you can click on the button here. And if you like that image, the Poetic Justice shirt, the fist and the pen, you can buy yourself a shirt as well. I have one myself that I like to share and show off, because we can not only just have writing for ourselves, but we can also have writing to create change for other people as well. So thank you so very much for being here with me today. I will be getting in contact here fairly soon. I hope you enjoy the rest of your time together here at the Ed Collaborative. It was my pleasure being here. And I really appreciate Chris Lehman and everyone who has come together to make these collaborations a success. So thank you very much. If you'd like to find the QR code for this presentation, you can see it there. And there's also a URL down there as well. Thank you so very much, everybody. Have a lovely day.